So it looks like we're making yet another video about Destiny. Now, as you guys know, I've talked about Destiny pretty much at length, and I also recently had made a video basically looking at a video that he made that was really, really horrible. That was a response to Michael Brooks. I recommend you go check that out because that adds up a lot to this, and it has to deal with this as well. He does bring up basically the same critique that he levied against Michael Brooks in that video. um, he levies in this one. Now, it's always kind of tough to do responses to Destiny's videos because they're so all over the place and they make no sense. And so it's kind of like, wow, you really have no idea what you're talking about, and it's this sort of very weird thing. And you'll see what I mean, and I'll explain what I mean when I show you this clip. Now, shout out to a guy by the name Retro Proto. He actually clipped this and posted it on the subreddit. Make sure to subscribe to the subreddit, reddit.com/r/progressive voice. I'll be sure to leave a link to that down below in the description box. But he's on a podcast of a guy named Mindwaves. I don't really know like a vast majority of these people on screen. I don't know who these people are except for Mindwaves, essentially. But he's going to go after here Kyle Kulinski and Michael Brooks because he has a couple of buddies of his, essentially, who he respects and says are fine. But the rest of these guys, they're just simply not good. So let's go ahead and play this clip.
Up and murdering the bourgeoisie, right?
Sure,
Like,
it's possible that that's true. I can only go by what I see over here in the great lands of the West. But like, holy shit, man! Like and maybe Mindwaves, maybe this is where some of my takes like start to bother you. The types of people that shill hardest for Bernie, like Michael Brooks or Kyle Kulinski, have some of the most dog shit political takes I've ever seen in my entire life. Whenever you see these like new candidates rise in the polls, and you see the most ridiculous attacks in the world, where Kyle Kulinski suggests that black people don't like Pete because of his policies, but won't sit there and wonder, well, why do Biden support Bernie, or why do black people support Biden so much more than they support Bernie, right? You'll never think of that, right? Or when you get people like Michael Brooks coming out and be like, this is so disgusting that Pete Buttigieg says that black people should have role models. What a horrible take. What? This is the most standard like milquetoast take in the world. Like all the commentary has been like poisoned with this obsession with this like socialist purity that's like that came out of nowhere. I don't know. It blows my mind.
It probably blows your mind because this literally makes no sense. So first of all, he's incorrectly using the term shill here, obviously. That's not the correct usage of the term shill. That's to advance someone else's agenda, not your own agenda, moron. But anyways, so what he's trying to say here is that, Kyle Kulinski and Michael Brooks are doing this. Kyle Kulinski first he brings up is basically saying about the Pete Buttigieg thing, right? Oh, well, he says that Pete Buttigieg, black people don't like Pete Buttigieg because of his policies, but why do they like Biden? Imagine saying that out loud without thinking in your brain, why is it that African American voters like Joe Biden? I don't know. Maybe it's because he was the vice president of the first African American president ever, that being Barack Obama. Did that ever cross your mind at any point in time? Also, you guys know there's a big scandal of Pete over in his city, his tiny city in South Bend, where there's like this police controversy where, there's something that happened, and then there's this video of him where there are basically these black constituents who come up to him and saying, how can we vote for you if you're doing stuff like this? And he responds to them so smugly, and he always does this. He's a real smug D-bag, all right? Pete Buttigieg, that is. And he says, I'm not asking for your vote, which is like, wow, what is that supposed to mean? That sounds very loaded, by the way. Sounds extremely loaded to me. But, you're talking about all of these things. But the idea that you can't understand why black people don't also dislike Joe Biden, or that why they like Biden, that is, because obviously Barack Obama was the president, he was the vice president, again, just goes to show you how dumb this guy is. Then he moves on to Michael Brooks. Okay, now this is sort of a continuation of the whole Michael Brooks thing. It's especially weird to me that he's really appalled by this because in that video that Destiny does, he actually goes on to state a bunch of issues that exist that basically prevent minorities from succeeding. That being problems with the criminal justice system, etc., right? So he says all those things because he somehow is under the belief that Michael Brooks is a class reductionist, which if you've seen anything of Michael Brooks, the last thing that Michael Brooks would be is a class reductionist. All he talks about is race all the time. He always talks about that. So he's mentioning all of those things that are that make it harder for minorities to succeed, but then here he doesn't understand why Michael Brooks is talking about how just this role models thing is not the reason why minorities can't succeed. Michael Brooks was making the point that overall, it's not that they don't have role models, it's that the entire system is rigged against them. That's the point he's trying to make. Imagine looking at that take and then responding with like, oh, what a disgusting take, this propagandist leftist socialist. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, that's what you were arguing for in your own video that you were responding to. You started listing off all of the things that are systemically against minorities. So how are you going to say both of those things? They don't coincide. You didn't understand the point that he was making. You mistook him as a class reductionist, and you're, having this stupid outrage that makes literally 0 sense, okay? I'm talking literally 0 sense. So when he talks about Michael Brooks and does this weird, like, straw man and vision that he has of him as a class reductionist, he's not even on the same page. Also, he has this weird tendency to do this, right? He thinks that because it's like this weird thing that when a candidate rises in the polls, right? This is an election, right? When a candidate rises in the polls, wow, why is the person who is running against them, why are their supporters telling you why you shouldn't support that candidate? Gee, I wonder why. What do you think the reason for that is, Destiny? What do you think the reason is that they're starting to get at? Like, why would you go after somebody who's at like 2% and isn't a threat? Whereas when they start getting into like 10, let's say, you want to tell people like, this is why I support my candidate. This is why I don't support this candidate. So it's one thing to essentially be like, okay, your attacks are just false and they're wrong and they're incorrect for reason X, Y, and Z. But when you start questioning why they start happening when they rise in the polls, it's a whole nother thing. That's like asking like asking an NBA team like why they're trying harder in the playoffs, or why they're trying to get a 1 seed instead of an 8 seed. Like, why are you trying to score more points than the opponent? What are you doing? Like, obviously, it's because the person's trying to win. We want Bernie Sanders to win because he is our candidate. He represents our views. So it's not shilling. We're not shilling. What is that? That's not a proper usage of the term. So that also befuddles me completely. And finally, the biggest point here that I want to make to you, and actually it's a couple of big points here that I want to make to you. One of them being, he seems to group and lump everyone together. First of all, Bernie Sanders himself is not a socialist. Michael Brooks is a socialist. But Kyle Kulinski is not a socialist, man. That dude's a capitalist. He's obviously a well-off dude, you know what I'm saying? So he's not really calling for the control of the means of production. He's not a socialist at all. But when he says this socialist purity, in his mind, it seems to be the case that he thinks that either A, Bernie Sanders or his supporters are like all socialists. Bernie Sanders is not himself a socialist. Kyle Kulinski is not a socialist. I am not a socialist. And he's starting to basically plump in socialists and far lefties, however far you on the left-wing spectrum, anything socialist far on, whatever weird flavor of left you want to do. And yes, I do agree that all this sorts of random flavor of far leftism is really cringe, and it's not realistic, and it's not feasible, and it's not going to happen, so stop wasting your time. I agree with that. But he's trying to lump in everything, as if, like, he also seems to be under the impression that, like, oh, if you believe in something like billionaires shouldn't exist, you're obviously a communist, a Marxist, socialist. No, you're not. That's a very basic thing. You can totally be an ardent capitalist and be a believer in that. Totally. Because otherwise Jeff Bezos' head is going to end up on a stake eventually. That's what's going to happen, right? That's, French Revolution type of stuff, right? So that makes no sense. And so he's plumping in someone like me. I'm not a socialist. I've never been a socialist in my life. And Kyle Kulinski is a socialist. It's so hilarious to me. So it's a mix of being uneducated as well as delusional and stupid. Like, there's this weird the cabal of destiny that's going on, where you're somehow under the impression that either Bernie Sanders or all of his supporters are socialists. What I think is going on is he's deluded himself to essentially, I guess, just watching or just conversing with people who are far lefties. And so in his mind now, all of a sudden, everybody is this far lefty, which is utterly ridiculous and, quite frankly, quite embarrassing. And again, like when I said in the beginning, that it's hard to do response videos to this because his criticisms are so incoherent. It's virtually impossible to really, have a cogent response, just because the criticism that's being levied is so insanely incoherent. I mean, it's absolutely embarrassing. It's totally embarrassing. So I don't know what he's thinking or what he's watching or what he's doing here. And I guess the Destiny approved pundits are David Pakman, who's funny enough a centrist, and then Sam Cedar, which I think given enough time, I think that he's gonna disown Sam Cedar the same way that he did to Michael Brooks. Now, to be fair, Sam Cedar is not a socialist like Michael Brooks is. Michael Brooks is a socialist. Sam Cedar is not. So maybe not, but I think if you're going to say that Kyle Kulinski is a socialist or lumping him into this whatever socialist purity that he says, then I think that you're eventually going to do the same thing with Sam. And then obviously David Pakman is cool because, you know, he's the big old centrist who makes MSNBC videos all day long, right? So that's not surprising at all. You know, they're good buddies for obvious reason. But anyways, just to, you know, let you know once again, Destiny is still firmly a moron.